tohu, or his sign, dipping the quill several times into a pot of ink would have extended the ritual of the sale process and the solemn binding together of the parties. His moko was not very elaborated, but more elaborated than Rewa's, who you can see, on the lower left-hand side of the deed. So perhaps Hongi Hika made the decision, reflecting his recognition perhaps of European impatience regarding time, to stop after drawing only part of his face. Can we read in the abbreviated moko some ambivalence and get a whiff of the risky business in which he knew he was engaged? Or was he impressed with the brevity of the signatures of powerful Europeans? In the European world, the Pākehā chief's authority or power could exist literally in his inked name, drawn by him on the page. Hongi Hika could not write his name, but his name on a piece of paper, even penned by his own hand, would not have conveyed his mana, his authority, in the same way that his tāmoko could. Amongst Māori, chiefly authority was embodied and resided in the body and the responsiveness of the people to that body, and in his or her spoken words in relation to people. But here, embodied in this ink quill paper assemblage, is a moment in history when that Māori authority relation is beginning to take a new form. By carefully placing his written face on the page of other marks, Hongi Hika places his authority on the page, thereby bringing paper into the flows of Māori power. In other words, the signed page is more than an artefact in the history of European land purchase or European robbery, or an act of a naive chief going along with a peculiar European ritual. The liveliness of Hongi's moko expresses a strategic tying of the Pākehā into a relationship via a new medium. Hongi's moko brings his Pākehā onto his land, into his territory, and gives them authority to be there, and the authority to use the plants of the land and the forests indefinitely or until their displacement by war. And if you read this, you can see that they have all the timbers, materials, water rights and appurtenances of the same that are now belonging to, in this case, the Church of England. So his moko brings his Pākehā there, and Hongi's power would have meant that their displacement from the land by war was very unlikely, because the moko provides the protection. So he's giving his protection to them. Discussing the question of land sale recently, Hugh Rihari, who is a descendant of Hongi's people, stated that rather than a full and final payment, the gift of axes for the land was to bind the parties together. The axes, he said, signified, and I quote, the obligation of the ancestors to provide the newcomers with protection, to sow them into the land, to weave them into the local tribe, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entailed. John Pollack said something similar in the 1830s when he purchased land. After signing a deed, the chief Kamara declared that Pollack, quote, had become incorporated into his tribe as an actual possessor of territory in the same district as themselves. Can we usefully consider Hongi Hika's moko signature as an actant? Bruno Latour's notion of an actant is, quote, a source of action that can be either human or non-human, and most likely a combination of both, says Bennett. It is that which has efficacy, can do things, has sufficient coherence to make a difference, produce effects, alter the course of events. In an obvious way, a signature is a classic example of an actant. As an object, even separated from the context of its production, a signature has direct efficacy. Indeed, that is its purpose. It exists in its intervention in human action. How does this object act? In the flows of European power and material culture, Hongi's moko denotes his agreement that the Kerikeri land was sold. Its immediate effect was land alienation. Taking what might be called a materialist methodology, is it possible to feel the desire of those marks? Can we approach the mark, as Jane Bennett suggests, with, and I'm looking for her methodological, kind of help here. She says we have to approach objects with a cultivated, patient, sensory attentiveness to non-human forces, or a sensitivity to the scent of a thingly power. You can feel the struggle with how to engage. An alertness to matter as vibrant, vital, energetic, lively, quivering, vibratory, evanescent, and efflorescent. I think we can grope towards discerning the thingly power of the inked object. A focus on such marks, an openness to them, invites us to enter the skin, the hand, the muscle, arm and mind of the writer. Through the moko and its complex, careful and significant shape, something speaks. Hongi's pure presence, his dignified authority that extends over this paper document and gives it its mana, its authority for all of us. In the presence of Hongika, the document tells a different story from that of European land cheats and naive local owners. In his presence, the moko and Hongihika's deed locate themselves positively within a history of Ngāpuhi people. Right, Te Kawehau is going to say a few things to conclude.
At the beginning of our talk, we recalled the politics of work in Māori education. My examination of everyday Māori concepts challenges the dualistic and essentialist politics of kaupapa Māori, of a kaupapa Māori, that conforms to the very logic it critiques. A new materialist engagement with Māori thinking might provide some alternatives to these negative tendencies of kaupapa Māori and revitalises in some ways my own positive engagement with Māori knowledge. I remain ambivalent, however. Non-dualistic Indigenous thought does not seek legitimation by the insights of European theories as they discover a non-Cartesian logic which Indigenous people always had. Alison's archival work brings her face to face with the object nature of Hongi's moko and invites us to at least attempt to enter a relationship with Māori thought. The thing power of Hongi Hika's moko speaks eloquently against the dominant reading of the deed on which it lives. To finish, we have begun to put some new materialist ideas to work in our shared field of Indigenous studies and education. We've been struck by the congruence between some of the new materialist arguments and Māori Indigenous onto-epistemologies. We wonder about how the emphasis on relationality in both Māori philosophy and new materialisms might inform an ethical politics based in relationships both amongst humans and between humans and non-humans. This is the work we continue to do. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Okay, thank you both for an utterly enthralling presentation, actually. Let's just have a few comments before we break up. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. At the end, I'm sorry.
Kawehau.
Can you say?
Te Kawehau.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's But basically, I mean, I think some of the ideas I touched on today can kind of perhaps be the basis for thinking about a politics, you know, even in the context of power relationships, that still is interested in engagement and relationship, however risky that might be. Because I don't think there's really future in the kind of them and us politics that we've been doing for quite a long time. And I think there's just heaps in Indigenous and Māori thinking and in history that shows us, you know, that kind of can tell us something about those political possibilities. And it requires us to draw on our kind of ethical foundations, if you like, I think, in Indigenous thought as a, you know, as providing some of that energy for a politics that goes beyond just the binary colonise and colonised.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question about the use of Janet, the object, and the encounter. So my understanding is that the encounter produces the ability, I guess, to think otherwise with comparison. And I'm wondering about how you draw on that with the idea of sustaining Indigenous thought and what risk there is in using that.
How that is sustained in Indigenous thought.
So if you're thinking about an Indigenous thought and supporting culture, sustaining culture, and Māori culture, what risk is there in using somebody who sort of articulates knowledge different from otherwise and a departure from any sort of narrative?
I guess the only way I can answer that is by saying, well, I hoped that in the work I was doing with that document, and in particular that particular object kind of disembodied in a way, taken out of that, and then focused on doing exactly the work that I think Bennett can stimulate us to do. And in doing that, in re-encountering something like that with more intensity, coming to be able to give attention to some of the things that most Pākehā and analysts of a document like that wouldn't be even thinking about. They'd be thinking about, you know, the way that the deed sits in a certain kind of historical set of relationships, set of land alienations and so on. And so I'm not sure what the risks might be there. But I'm hoping that this kind of work can kind of allow us to get into that relationality that she talks about by doing it through particular kinds of objects that have not necessarily had that relational work, if you like, applied to them. I don't like to use that language, but engaged, that haven't been engaged with in that way before, that are Indigenous objects or any other kind of objects, but we happen to be working in this particular fraught field.
Kawehau, I wanted to ask you, when you were talking about the SIQR, and you seem to do this gesture, and I wondered whether the gesture is part of what's happening with the particular words in the greeting or in a leave taking. So I guess I'm asking about the materiality of the gesture within the vocalisation. Was that just incidental, or is that?
Yeah, probably was.
But I think the
there
point,
you are.
the point is, I think the kia ora, the kia is a kind of statement of an injunction. So kia ora is be alive.
Yeah.
So it's not just kind of g'day or hello, it is
So it's
actually
performative.
It's performative, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes us alive together, or us all alive together in this engagement. And when we say kia ora at the end, that's just a kind of polite sort of connection, yeah. But I don't think any of it, I mean, I'm doing gestures too. I think that's a more kind of just trying to embody it as a sort of performative word.
Yeah.
Could I do my special issue now
What?
before we leave the?
Yeah, but shall we wait till we finish the session?
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
do it? Yeah. I'm sorry, Liz. I was just going to continue with that thing about the gesture and so on, because one of the things that struck me in the clip that you showed was how utterly kind of entwined bodies and noise and sound and language, but it wasn't all language, I presume, because it's all about, it reminded me of Alicia's stuff about the refrain, and there was movement and objects, you know, so it's so much more than just a kind of either a concept or a word, isn't it? I mean, you know, and it reminds us that that's in fact always the case, but we don't see it because we've become so kind of
Yes, yes.
Ethereal
And it's easier
about
to
language.
objectify that as
Yeah.
a kind of foreign event that we can look at.
Yeah.
But when you said that, yes, it recalls when we have graduation, when Maori students graduate and come across the stage, there will often be the family members or a group of people will get up and perform that same kind of engagement, if you like, with that person from the audience. And there's huge tolerance for this, you know, so the whole ceremony will be not interrupted, but that will be part of the ceremony. And it's that sense of reaching out, connecting, and we all know at that moment that that person's achievement to get that thing was not theirs. You know, it was actually a kind of, and it's very, you feel it in your body, that it's actually the kind of whole history of that person, their family, the struggles, the person's future, their bodies, everything is kind of tied up in that moment that is now sort of, you know, a Western ritual of the giving of the degree with your hat and your gown and everything like that. But it very much becomes that same kind of affective performance that, I mean, we're used to it now as a part of everyday life, but it's still, it never fails to, even though it's repeated, it never fails to have that kind of visceral effect you probably not.
Yeah, I think there's something in what you were saying yesterday about the kind of the
Yes, the
repetition
repetition.
of it that I can certainly not feel it.
Yeah. Liz, sorry. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Liz, thank you very much. In fact, it was incredibly powerful, your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Shout, Liz.
Oh, sorry. I just said I really enjoyed it. Now I'll get on to the question. One of the things I was thinking about was, would you consider a line of flight that might take you into sort of an essentialist position or a kind of standpoint position because of, I was thinking here of the sort of feminist thing just as I was about to claim the subject and on they came and took my subject away, and that kind of thinking. So I was kind of having, and recognizing your context is such a geographically fragile, you know, the earth tremors, materials at work there, and you have the newly arrived people with languages that are different, and you know, the sort of demographic is constantly shifting. So is there kind of sometimes a temptation to say, you know, this is what I'm taking?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm not opposed to that at all. I mean, it's utterly necessary, I guess. But if that's all we have, and if that's, I mean, my critique of that has been that, you know, the academy at least has got to be one of the places in which, you know, we're doing something different, and we shouldn't just be repeating the politics of the street there. So of course it's risky, and of course those assertions I do them every day myself, are required, you know. Yeah. Is that enough of an answer?
That's great. Well, we probably should be coming to an end. One thing I just wanted to say was it was so resonant, this talk with things that are floating around. So the idea of the thingly power of the inked object and the deed on which it lives has just kind of made me completely rethink all sorts of things about writing and objects and so on. So anyway, just thank you very much, both of you. It's been wonderful. Okay, now